Charles Hsuan, story selling coach, on the show today. So thank you for joining us, Charles.
Matthew, the pleasure is all mine.
It's great to have you on here. And today we're going to be talking about the assumption, I know what you mean. And I've come to understand myself as experiencing the world differently to quite a lot of people. So this particular one in both directions
Mm.
has definitely been a tricky assumption for me, a thing I've fallen over. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this a bit more today. But before we do, just in case you're new to the show and you don't, Delightful Dissent is really, it's a shared exploration of something that we often take for granted or gets overlooked. And it came about through my work, talking to people taking different and pioneering approaches to complex problems and to different things. And Charles is absolutely one of those people. And I found that a lot of us hit these kind of hidden barriers where there's this implicit belief, this thing that we haven't really talked about, but that's really under an underpinning assumption. And I wanted to challenge those, get some of them out in the open, see how true they were. So I really hope this show helps you in the audience, give you some specific ideas about things you might be able to approach differently in your professional and or personal life. But perhaps more importantly, I hope it gives you some ideas about how you can go out there and challenge assumptions yourself, because I'd like this to be something that everyone does and that happens all the time, so that we can always be checking in on this stuff and figuring it out. And the show is called Delightful Dissent because, we might be kind of, disagreeing with with the prevailing wisdom. We might even be disagreeing with each other. But it's about having fun and playing with possibilities and different ways of seeing things rather than proving ourselves right at everyone else's expense. And the show is genuinely live, so please do bear with us if there are any kind of technical issues or anything crops up. And do be aware that we might be talking about some challenging and difficult things. The topics today are likely to be around perhaps misunderstandings and the difficulties that can come with those, around neurodiversity, and around uncertainty and how we engage with that. And also, please do be warned that there may be strong language. So if that's an issue for you, then please just know that that's a possibility. There aren't any perfect answers here. It's about exploring and asking questions. That's what we're going to be doing. And I'd invite you in the audience to do exactly the same. If you're watching live, please do comment and we can bring in anything that you mention on the actually as part of the conversation. If you're watching or listening to the recording, then I'll be sharing information about how you can get in touch with both of us at the end of the show. So, I was first introduced to Charles through actually, former guest and friend of the show, Francis Kalashji, and we kind of got chatting and just had a really interesting, fun, wide-ranging conversation. But I was particularly struck by Charles, by your ability to engage with profound and sometimes quite difficult things, but in a very approachable, manageable, practical way. And so I really wanted to share some of that with everyone in the audience. But could I ask you perhaps to introduce yourself a little bit and the work you do and the kind of people you like to work with, please?
Absolutely, Matthew. And I was quite surprised about your comment about some of the things that I tackle and make it in a more palatable way. Because for me, that's just how my brain works. So I cannot, for me, because I have ADHD, and like most people that I've come across, this is just my informal survey, is most people that I come across prefer to make the complex simple. Every now and then you run into people that like to make the simple complex. Those type of people, they're not my jam. It's like the type of people that you ask them a simple question, then they go round and round the block. It's like, okay, what's your point? What's your point? And I kind of lose focus after a while. So, so I don't know if that's what you were referring to, but in terms of what I do and what my speciality is, very, very simple. I have noticed that the quickest way to get anybody's attention is by speaking to their pain. because we are faced with at least 5,000 adverts every single day. The quickest way to get somebody's attention is by speaking to their pain. So I work with business owners to master that. And the tool that we use is story selling, because when that happens, you have you get to close bigger deals, you have shorter sales cycle, and you have happier clients. So I've just been summarizing it and working on the process over the years, and I've noticed this is something that is a totally transferable skill. So I wake up in the morning loving what I do.
That's fantastic, and as a kind of as a space to get to, I think that's a really really wonderful one. How is it? How did you get to doing this particular thing though? Because it's not like there isn't
No, it's not a career day.
straightforward. It's not a career pathway that you
No,
get for
no,
Yeah.
it's not a career day that you get asked in high school to say, hey, how about this? Anybody wants to do this? So I remember growing up, I was forever getting into trouble. The things that I heard the most is, why can't you keep quiet? Why can't you stop talking? Why can't you just? Then my parents took me to see a doctor. That's when I was diagnosed with ADHD. But because of ADHD, the whole time ADHD was labeled as shame and blame. Anything related to ADHD was never anything good. I'm messing up. Oh, it must be because of ADHD. Charles can't sit still. Must be his ADHD. Charles couldn't focus in class. Must be his ADHD. And because of that, I had to find different ways of surviving. So, like, we all have natural skills. So some of the skills that we're born with, for example, if somebody is a fast runner, they might get into athletics in school, or somebody is good with academics, they'll go towards that. I wasn't born with those skills. So I had to find certain things to cope with, to survive, to help me pass school, as an example. And if I look back, there was a genesis to make the complex simple, because I had to summarize whatever I learned in school in a simple way, because simple is memorable, memorable is repeatable. And I find the easiest way to make sure if you understand something is by you teaching it to somebody else. Then you get to see how much you know. And I studied financial accounting. Financial management. I wanted to be a stockbroker, but I ended up working for a bank for like 7 years, which was the worst period of my life. It was very, very boring, shirt and tie every day. Until I got into sales one day. That's when I realized, wait a minute, this is something that I'm actually naturally good at. I must say, look, I got a lot of sales training and coaching over the years from the company that I work with. So I've also learned that it's something that you can always improve on. But to answer your question, how did that actually develop? So this is just the background, how I realized, like, first of all, I was good at selling. And the other thing I realized is my last official job was, I was used to working in advertising, a company called Entrepreneur Media. And I was there for 4 years. 3 out of the 4 years of the top performer. I won weekly, monthly, annual, yearly prizes, overseas trip. So I started reflecting, like, we all have the same technology. So Matthew, let's say if you were my colleague, we have the same laptop, we have the same training. Why is it that I am beating everybody else? I started reflecting. Few things stood out. Number one, I realized I was using story to sell. So let me illustrate this by example. So every month when the publication came out, I'll spend that Saturday reading through it, making notes. So I memorized some of the stories. The magazine had different sections. Start your business, grow your business. Start your business, grow your business, and start, plan, and grow. I think that's one of those. They focus on startups, people that's growing, and the people that's listed companies, different sections. So let's say, Matthew, you are a startup and you come and chat to me and say you wanted to advertise in the publication. What I will used to do is I'll mention certain people that's mentioned in the magazine to say, hey, we actually recently featured this merchant. Have you heard of them? Yes, I have. So this person is doing this and this. Is this somebody that you want to get hold of? Yes. So that's what I'm talking about. Instead of saying these are our stats, I mentioned this person's name, a brand that you're familiar with, a brand that we are featured, and this is the type of people that you want to get hold of to advertise your product. story selling, using stories to sell. And then you back it up with stat. Oh, by the way, the sector that you're looking for, we have X amount, demographic, story selling. And that's what I'm talking about. That I started to coach my other colleagues because this is something that is easily transferable. And that's how the whole process of coming about. And I started this journey back in 2018.
Oh, cool. That's when I started doing my own thing as well. Interesting. That's, yeah, we were coincided. So both kind of went off in our own direction that year. That's nice. So yeah, no, I really, yeah, I think it's such a fascinating thing, and that the power of the stories that we tell to other people and to ourselves as well is a huge thing, and a very overlooked part of the work when we're in such a data-driven kind of world, and so many of our decisions are actually kind of narrative and emotional rather than being truly data-driven.
You know what? I don't know if you've noticed this or not, that if you are, well, in South Africa we call it having a braai. In UK, I don't know, you guys call it a barbecue. What do you guys call it?
Yeah, got it.
A barbecue. Okay. Yeah. So if you are at a barbecue, or actually at a pub, let's say if you hang out with your friends at a pub, and they ask you about your day, you are going to use everyday language. You're going to be sharing stories. Oh, you know what happened to my colleague? Oh, you cannot believe this guy. Oh, my new boss. You know, you share stories. But all of a sudden, if you're in a boardroom, we use big words that make us sound impressive. You talk about ROI. You talk about this figures. You talk about exponential. You talk about pivot. But you don't use those words when you're at a pub. So that's when I realized that there's a disconnect. Why you are connecting with your mate at a pub using everyday language, do the same in a business meeting. Using big words doesn't make you smarter. It actually alienates you from the crowd. It's like if you go to a doctor and the doctor give you a whole list of jargons, he might sound smart, but for you, it's not helping you at all.
It's that huge gap of like, okay, I understand in abstract, but what does that mean for me?
Exactly. And that's the key that I'm always pushing my clients to use simple language. Don't use, so as a rule, when we are working coaching, I'll say to them, Matthew, for example, in your line of business, what are some of the jargons that get coming up over and over again? Can you give me 5?
You're asking someone else with ADHD to come up with a list of things. I guess in the tech world, there's so many to choose from in the tech world that I kind of almost can't pick any. Like the whole practices jargon. Like there's like, oh yeah, even like things like cloud.
What about neurodiversity?
Like neurodiversity, yeah.
Neurodiversity, okay. Neurodiversity, that's one of them. You mentioned cloud, or give me 2 more. Give me something that's within ADHD that you feel
within
like
the ADHD. Well, ADHD itself, I think,
is
jargon. You know, yeah.
Okay. So as an example, I'll get you to write out 5 jargons that you use in your line of work every day. During the session, during the next 3 months, you're not allowed to use those words. You have to find other words that is simple, easy to understand, because we all have. What is this thing called? This was designed by a psychologist years ago. It's like you forget. Oh, I slipped my mind now. Oh my goodness, it's on my laptop somewhere.
It'll come back. It'll come back.
Basically, if you are so used to certain jargons, you forget what it's like not to know something. I'm pretty sure you know it too.
Burden of knowledge.
I think curse of knowledge.
Yeah.
And we're trying to break the curse of knowledge, because you forget what it's like not to know what it is. So during the workshop, you're not allowed to use jargon, find other words. And even so, think about it, like even a simple word could have different meanings to different people. So if I have to say to you, Matthew, what is a home? Give me a definition of a home.
Yeah. My difficulty is you like, because I'm thinking now in terms of like all of the different possibilities, that I'm really struggling to come up with any words for it, which I think is a really interesting, like.
Okay, if somebody in primary school, let's say a grade 1 person, say to Uncle Matthew, we learned this thing called a house. What does that mean?
A house is a place where people live. I think home is somewhere where you belong, but that's
You see,
there's a
even so, as an example, even such a simple word, and you ask 10 different people, you get 10 different definitions. So that's my point. Like, if such a simple word, a common word like a home, as an example, can have different meanings, can you imagine the layers of jargons? How complicated that makes everything to be, because it comes with different stereotypes. Because again, it brings down to simple is memorable is portable. So as an example, when you're watching a movie, have you watched any good movies lately, or the next month, or next week or so?
I watched Glass Onion,
Oh
the
yeah,
new
yeah. We watched
Netflix.
it. I,
Yeah,
I watched it over the weekend with my wife. Brilliant movie. I'm not going to give away the
exactly.
the.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like it
Probably,
sucks up.
it's
Anyway,
good. It's worth watching.
okay. So as an example, I think the movie is what, 2.5 hours. So if somebody had to say to you, "What's Glass Onion all about?" you most likely will summarize it in 30 seconds. Exactly. So it's the same in selling. Like I've seen this over and over again. Stories like the mistake that people make is they do what I call the pitch up and puke up. They rock up and they show you everything, and then you're like, okay, what am I supposed to remember?
Yeah, there's no way for people to make sense of it, and it's a real, like, I think we're getting really close to actually onto the assumption itself here. But before we really get into that, do you have a quote that you'd like to share that kind of, gives us a bit of an angle on this for you?
Well, it's something that I'm sharing with you, and also something that I'm trying to remind myself every day. And it's a quote that says that the biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. And that's by Stephen Covey. We listen not to understand, we listen to reply. And this happens, sadly, a lot more and a lot more frequent when we're dealing with somebody that's close to us, i.e., our families, our siblings, our parents. I see that. I'm guilty of it. I'm putting up my hand. Like, my wife hates it. She's like, "You didn't even let me finish." But I'm like, well, 70% of the time, I kind of know what you're going to say. And the times that I get it wrong, she's like, "You see, you didn't let me finish." And vice versa. And vice versa. And it's the same in sales. It's the same in everyday life. Like, I've actually read a study about this, like with doctors, like on average, how quickly a doctor interrupts a patient. I think it's less than 20 seconds, which is scary, because how are you supposed to make a diagnosis within 20 seconds? It's very, very scary. So I think this is not just with sales. This goes a lot more further. If you just find out what the person means instead of just what they're actually saying, which I remember sharing this. I suppose the story will help illustrate the point. The mother and daughter, Jennifer and Christopher. So when Christopher was a little boy, around I think 5 or 6, he came home one day and said, "Hey, mommy, we learned how to do maths." And she's like, "Wonderful. And what did you learn?" "Mommy, we learned that 3 is half of 8. So she's like, "What? What did you say?" She said, "Mommy, we learned that 3 is half of 8. And Jennifer was a primary school teacher. She almost had a heart attack. She's like, "What are they teaching kids at school these days?" So she picks up little Christopher, puts him on the table, and take out a roll of like M&Ms. So puts 4 on one side and 4 on one side, and put it divided to say, "Okay, Christopher, how many on this side?" 4. "What about this side?" "Mommy, I don't need to see. I know it's 4. "See, Christopher, 4 is half of 8, not 3. Christopher thinks for a second, jumps off the table, takes out a piece of paper, make a figure 8, tears it into half, and say, "See, 3 is half of 8. If we follow that logic, if you fold the 8, 0 can be half of 8, 4 can be half of 8, 3 can be half of 8. We only know what the person means if we actually find out to say, "What do you mean by that? Tell me more. How did you reach that conclusion?" That is, I think, if we try to do things and approach it in that way, like I try to, first of all, my wife is definitely my lab rat. because if she gives me an instruction and it seems very vague, and I'll say to her, honey, I need more. What do you mean by that? It's very vague to me. So I'm using her as a lab rat to force me to use that as a everyday vocabulary. But that being said, Matthew, it's something that we have to work on.
And I think yeah, there's so many sides to this particular one, and it's a relationship to like this assumption that we know what someone else means. And I think for me, one of the things is I actually have a working assumption that I don't, because I've lived for so long. A bit like the world showed me that clearly young. And so I'm actually really careful, and I ask a ton of questions. And actually, I also get in trouble for that. And I think there's a really interesting balance here,
Yeah.
because like some of the questions that we ask sometimes, that's like, you know, it's seen as asking too many questions, or asking like, I never understood as a child when I was asking all these questions why I used to get in trouble, because I needed them to understand.
Did they find you like nosy or getting a bit too
Nosy, or
personal?
like, or that what I also come to understand is that people found it kind of like I was challenging them by asking questions, when I was just asking questions because I needed the answer, and they were like, well, you know the answer, like I was being difficult, or it's like, actually I just needed to know the answer so I could figure out what someone else wanted of me.
You know what? That's a very good point, and I think like we must not take it personal, because sometimes that person could be just having a bad day. Like for example, today I did not get a good night's sleep the night before, and normally I'm all for questions, but if people had to ask me questions or they beat around the bush, I'll get irritated. It's like, just get to the point. What are you trying to say? It actually happened today, right? So I'll give you an example. So Thursday is bin day by my house, and the gardener is here and he's mowing the lawn, and because of that, there's grass in the black bags. We put it out there next to the bin, and then the gardener runs in to say, Charles, there's a problem. Like, okay, what's the problem? The garbage guys will say, we're not allowed to take the grass, only the bin. He said, but we can work something out. Okay, and at that point, like, I'm short of them. Okay, like for example, Matthew, what are you trying to get to? Work something out. What are you trying to say? Do you want money? What do you want? Like, just get to the point. He said, no, give us a Coke. That's all he wanted, just a Coke. Then they will take the grass from me. Normally, I understand how the culture works in South Africa. When they say that, they just want something. We can make a plan, or let's work something out. But at that point, I did not have the patience, or I didn't have the patience. I just said to them, okay, what are you looking for? Get to the point. You're looking for money. What are you looking for? And turns out he just wanted a bottle of Coke to share with his colleagues. And now, Matthew, every Thursday, I'm going to make sure I have a bottle of Coke ready so I can get my grass taken off.
And also there's this thing of like, there's something around this of actually really interesting about inferring what people really need, or what needs aren't currently being met from what people are doing and asking for. Because like for me, I'm thinking, well, actually, if it's hard to know how someone else is experiencing the world. I've never been collected bins, so I don't know what the needs are in that job, and I can kind of guess, but like it wouldn't necessarily occur to me, because my experience doesn't line up with that actually what would make their lives much better is just having a drink. And that if that was available on their round, that would be a good, so there's something around this, and around like being really, it feels like kind of a gift actually on some level, if we can give people this chance to figure out what their needs are as well, like underlying needs, because there's something in there.
It actually depends. I've noticed, I'm speaking for myself, that if I am coaching a client, then I'm actively listening, trying to find out. But with everyday life, I kind of like have an on and off switch. So doing coaching as an example, I will say to them, how can I best help you right now? instead of something called the advice monster. Oh, you know what you should do? You should be doing this. Or have you tried this yet? I will be very active and conscious and asking you, for example, Matthew, so how can I best serve you? And you might say to me, oh, I actually just need to go to the toilet, or I just need a Coke. So yes, absolutely. But I must say, I am guilty of that. I have an on and off button in everyday life. I don't normally ask people, especially the bin guy, how can I best serve you right now for you to take this rubbish off my ground?
Yeah. And you're right. We can't do it all the time, but I think there is something for me, in this. I know what you mean in spotting the small tells that we're wrong. It's like and working with that. It feels like there's something around it. We can't go through questioning everything all the time, because
it's too exhausting.
It would exhaust us, and it would exhaust everyone around us as well. But it feels like there's something around knowing when there's something a bit off in that. And does that resonate? Is that something that that fits with how you think about this as well?
Something a bit off. What are you talking about when somebody's trying to take advantage, or they're trying to ask for something that might be breaking the law? What do you mean by that?
No, I don't necessarily. Maybe, but also like just when what you've said hasn't landed, or you haven't understood, or you've said something like there's been an exchange, and it's like sometimes it's just that people, you say something to someone and they don't look like you'd expect, or like you've understood them.
Yeah.
Like they don't. You've said something, and this is a thing I do. Like I'm so used to kind of explaining something and someone else not understanding because they don't share my lived experience, that I often would just be like, oh, and I'll just drop it. And people who are kind of sensitive to this are like, well, wait, actually, did I not get that right? And sometimes that's quite a rare thing.
It depends, because I can see that sometimes if let's say if I'm at a shop, for example, and I'm looking for certain things, and I can see they're nodding, but I can see on their face when I'm asking them, they have no idea what I'm saying. So sometimes I just get straight to them and say, Matthew, do you understand what I'm asking, or are you just nodding for the sake of nodding?
Yeah.
I'll get straight to the point, because I need to find out.
Yeah.
And then the truth will normally come out.
And I think being willing to say, actually, are you getting me? And I think there's a lot of blame in this as well. It feels like if for me, I kind of put all of the burden of being understood on me.
Okay.
And I know other people who actually feel the opposite and expect the whole world to understand them kind of implicitly and get very angry when it doesn't. And actually, it's neither of those is actually the kind of reality. It's somewhere in between. And there's something about creating something together. There's a mutual understanding element of this, and I think it's really interesting when you're talking about the selling work. It's actually, it feels like a lot of what you're talking about is creating a mutual understanding.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's because one of the things, the key for me from being in sales for so many years is understanding what they need. Because if you understand what they need, then you know what to sell them. And I've seen this happen over and over again. Especially with telesales, they don't ask you. I'm sure on their side you get telesales too. When telesales people phone you, do they ask you a single question? They probably, exactly. It's like a disease that they have. They don't ask a single question. They start telling you all these things about the product. You don't. A perfect example: if they phone me up and say, "Hey, I'm phoning to offer you car insurance." Okay, first of all, do you even know if I own a car? Right, and if I'm happy with my insurance cover, they don't ask a single question, and that is the quickest way to put somebody off, because nobody likes being sold to. We love to buy, we love to buy, but we hate being sold to, and that's what I'm saying. One of the key that I've noticed is asking questions, and I guess it's not just because I have not come across a single person that I'm not just, this is extending beyond cells. I've not come across a single person that does not want to be seen, heard, and understood. Tell me which human being does not want to be seen, heard, and understood. And that's what I'm saying. It's beyond cells. And that's by asking questions. How did you come to that conclusion? What makes you say that? And a lot of times, especially in argument, that actually takes the pressure off us. So let's say I don't know. Let's say, Matthew, you for some reason, you said to me, "Oh, you're so arrogant, or you're so narrow in your ways." Instead of me getting defensive, I can say to Matthew, "What do you mean by that?" And now it's not on me. Now, Matthew, you have to defend what you just said now, because you're the one that made that statement. Now you have to explain yourself. The pressure's off me now.
And it also potentially gives you something actionable, because I think this is one of the other things. It's like, there's nothing, if you tell someone they're arrogant, it's like, well, what does that mean? You know,
okay, what must I do with that?
We kind of know it. We know it's a bad thing. We know what it looks like, but in the specific circumstance, it's like, well, what part of my behavior made you think that? And if we can't figure that out, and usually we can't, then there's very little we can do about it. So and I think that's part of, you know, when we're told that stuff, it's like, great, well, you've told me something negative, and I can't, but without giving me the information to address it. It's like, thanks.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. As one of the coaching things, it's something called the SPOT. The SPOT feedback is exactly that. So let's say, so SPOT, S stands for specific, P stands for possible outcome, possible income. Let me start again. S stands for specific, P stands for possible impact, O stands for opportunity to improve, T stands for timely. So let's say you're talking about you're arrogant, okay? Specific. When did this actually happen? It was on Wednesday doing a call with Matthew, okay? What exactly happened? What is the possible impact? Oh, you said this and this and this, okay? And what can I do in this case as an opportunity to improve? And you do it timely. So SPOT feedback, I find that it helps a lot. You don't wait for this like 6 months time. Oh, Matthew, you were arrogant when you had this conversation with me back in January, and we are like in June, July already. That doesn't help.
Absolutely.
So SPOT feedback, yeah. Again, I'm saying this to remind myself to have SPOT feedback, to be specific, to tell people this is a possible outcome, and to say to them, this is what we can do to improve, and we do it in a timely manner. SPOT.
And it feels like there's actually really interestingly something in letting go of some of the control and some of the need for certain outcomes in doing this. And maybe that's why it's a difficult thing to do sometimes, because this relates to one of the things I found that was really a challenge in how I explained my work. I have a particular thing. I find it easier to talk about than write it down, partly I think because writing it down makes it like more real and more concrete. But when I spent ages trying to figure out my like marketing and positioning and being like, how can I appeal to people? And when I stopped doing that and I was just like, okay, what I want to do is I want to present my work in a way that's going to be really clear so people can make their own decision about whether they want to work with me or not. And trusting that my work was worth that some people would be like, yes, I want to work with that person. But also trusting that like the clients I didn't want would look at it and go and sort themselves out instead of having to like, and it's like, but it was so hard before that point. And it also feels like, you know, when you're giving feedback, there's a bit of it that's like, actually, you have to give feedback quite freely as well. It's like, because you have to try, you know, there's a bit that's almost like,
you have to wear your big boy pants. Put on your big boy pants.
Yeah. And also that you're like, I might have misread, you know, and arrogance is a really interesting one, because arrogance is a really common thing that's ascribed to neurodivergent people.
Okay.
It's a common, and and one of the whole kind of difficulties around neurodiversity is, when we experience the world in a different way, people can kind of misread us. It's like, oh, the surface behavior will look like something that people assume is one thing or means one thing, but actually it'll be coming from a very different place and mean a very different thing from
Mm.
me.
Mm.
And so if people are, and the questioning is a really good example. It's like people think I'm being difficult. Actually, I'm just trying to meet my need here. I'm not like I'm. So there's something in that feedback thing where we have to be quite loose about our own inference, our own understanding of what someone else is trying to do as well.
You,
So
you
it
know,
feels like,
the point that you mentioned, right? It's so what I find quite useful, and because I've experienced that before, like, oh, why are you asking so many questions? So, or why are you being nosy? What I have done is I'll say to Matthew, I want to ask you about this and this, and the reason for that is so they understand. Okay, this person asking for a reason. So Matthew, I want to find out a little bit more about what you're going through, and the reason for that is so I can make sure that I'm the right coach to work with you, so they know. So you prep them ahead of time, so they know there's a
yeah,
reason for these questions. Or I've got 5 questions, and the reason for that is I need to make sure we can work well together because of X, Y, Z. That's
I
what I
think
find helps.
that's such a practical way of dealing with this problem. And I think, part of the reason we make these quick assumptions and we always jump to I know what you mean is sometimes because we just don't have the tools to do anything else. We kind of have to. And being able to ask the question, but then be able to say, and this is why I'm asking the question,
That's
is
why it takes a lot of thought, right? It takes a lot of thought to it's a something that we have to actively work on because we're not taught this in school.
no,
We
no,
we're not taught to ask questions in school.
no.
I not. I mean, in school you were taught to memorize, and there's only a right or wrong answer to everything. Either right, you're not really taught to ask questions. So I think that part. But kids always asking questions, and even asking questions is speaking about now we're talking about it's a big it's a there's even that as this technique. So I'll give you example. Let me use an example. I have a allergy about the most question. What's your or the biggest? What's your biggest hurdle? What's your most important? And the reason why I say that, so let's say if you are coaching somebody, you ask them straight away, what's your biggest challenge? That's like asking the person, and you hear this over and over again, like, oh, what's your biggest challenge in this and this? You are literally asking that person to open their heart up. They're not going to be comfortable doing that straight away. You need to earn that trust. So it's like, imagine you go to a pub and you meet up with a group of strangers, and the first thing you say to them, hey guys, can you tell me your deepest, darkest secrets? They're going to tell you to piss off. It's exactly the same. You need to earn that trust before you need to have that kind of some kind of relationship before you can get onto that level. Hey Matthew, listen, what are you struggling with? What are some of the 3 things that's really keeping you up at night? So even asking question itself, there's a technique in that. Otherwise, it just sounds whiny. Why? It sounds very whiny.
Yeah, I think that trust element, there's a mutual trust actually, in this, and this is one of the things that I think often trips people up in this space, and one of the things I'm really interested actually in exploring in how we structure our work a bit more is actually what if we extend the trust to our clients first, because we're asking them to trust us at least a little bit, and a lot of the way that business works at the moment feels very defensive. And it's almost like people don't trust their clients. And that's a really difficult
What
space
do you mean by
to
that?
do this kind of
Like
work.
in what way? When they say when you say they don't trust their clients.
So for example, this is part of the reason. So I price quite a lot of the work that I do on a pay what you want basis. So it's like,
What? Really?
yeah,
Okay.
really.
Okay.
Yeah. And it works.
Okay.
Partly because I'm clear about what I mean by pay what you want, which is directly related
Aha,
to the conversations that we've had. And
aha.
like, and I've got a, a thing of like, okay, this is what I think most people will pay. This is what, like, these are the boundaries of the like space, and these are the factors I think influence it. These are the factors that matter to me. And like, people can go outside of that or do, but extending some trust to our clients first. And in the sales conversation, we're talking about like, maybe we're extending the trust that we're being open about something we're experiencing, or where we've experienced a thing. And I think you're framing the question in terms of why you're asking is actually a way of doing that on some level, because it's like, I'm asking this question because I've experienced this.
Mm.
You're saying, you're kind of saying that on maybe implicitly, but it extends a degree of trust that the person's not going to turn around and say, well, that's stupid, isn't it? Or that's like, they're going to engage before we ask them to do the same for us.
Mm. Because you know what, with everything, and I truly believe it's a human condition, is we might born of a different background, raised in a different way, but we all tuning to the same radio station. This is the radio station, WeFM. Do you know what it stands for?
What does it stand for?
What's in it for me? WeFM. What's in it for me? That's what we're thinking about. That's the frequency that every single person is thinking about. Like for the listeners that's either watching or listening, right in the get go, you're thinking about WeFM. What's in it for me? Why should I invest an hour? Why should I listen to Matthew? Why should I listen to Charles? Why should I go out and watch that movie? Why should I read this book? What's in it for me? Right. So if we that's why I like the human nature. That's why it's so fascinating. If I can address, well, even you, especially when it comes to business, right? If I can address what you're going through and find out what your challenge is, and address it without asking you, I will have your attention because I'm tuning into your frequency, WeFM.
Mm.
And from yours, like you were talking about in the beginning, you struggled to find your words, to define what you do, but after a while you manage to get clients. So from these clients, they must have some commonalities. So if you ask them, they will definitely, oh, Matthew, I chose to work with you because of ABC.
Mm.
Once you find a commonality, that you can use that in conversation. The people that I normally work with are like this and this and this. They go through this and this and this. Does it sound like something that you're going through? That's a very quick way of filtering it out.
Mm.
And because that's the people that's actually paying you, and those are the people that you enjoy working with. So if you don't fit in that category, let's not waste each other's time. Thanks for the coffee. I'm going home.
And I think that willingness for it to be like, okay, we tried, it didn't. It is a difficult thing for a lot of people, and for me,
I'm not surprised that you say that. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that you say that. My wife asked me the same thing. How do you feel for turning down clients? I feel fantastic because I know by now the type of people I enjoy working with, and because if you as a business owner that's been around, I mean, we've been around since the same time. If you look back at some of the people that you work with, they are most likely some of the people you could have fired, or it was a bad idea, right? There might be too much of a brain drain. So why should you? It's like when you go onto the plane, they will always say to you, and I use the word always, put on your own mask first before helping somebody else. You can only give if your cup is full. So there are people that either pour into the cup or they take away. They either drain you or they fill you. I prefer with people that fill me, not the one that so I'm doing it for my own sanity. That's what I'm saying. So say no to that. You're actually doing that person a favor.
There's something really interesting in that for me, where the what's in it for me is like, I've always been better about answering that question for other people than for myself.
Okay.
And I think there's something really interesting in this around transparency, actually, and to sell the way that you're talking about selling, you actually need a quite high degree of clarity about your own needs and wants in the situation, and to be able to, and that's a really helpful discipline for, and it might also be the difference between someone who's instinctively a marketer and someone who's instinctively a salesperson. Because
Not necessarily. It can be trained. Because again, what's in the WeFM? What's in it for you, Matthew? You're gonna wake up loving doing what you do. So you have two options. You can either work with people that drain your energy or people that gives you energy. You pick. Most of the people, if you're not a sucker for punishment, you work with people that you enjoy working with.
It's just how, I think it's more like, maybe it's the direction in which you answer that question. So it's like, for me, I don't really know until I've kind of worked with other people, and I like what's in it for me is actually kind of through what's in it for other people. Whereas I think some people, it feels like, and perhaps you're talking about your sense of what you need and what you're going for is actually where you start. And whereas I start you need to get both. It needs to be both, right? This is the whole, like, it's a mutually beneficial relationship. So both parties are benefiting, but it's just where you start exploring that.
Absolutely, because again, it boils down to time. Like, I'd rather be working and actually, okay. So one of the things that in my coaching I mentioned is something called the buyer's pyramid. So think about this for a second. So let's say if you draw a triangle, 90% of the people, they are not your target market. 7 of them are open to what you have to share, and three people will be ready to buy. So I'll use some example. Are you in the market to buy a new phone in the next day or 2 days or 3 days or a week?
No.
Okay. What about a new pair of reading glasses?
I do actually need a new pair of glasses.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about earphones?
Actually, these earphones are nearly broken. So there's a big list of. Yeah.
Okay, but what about a new shirt, the flannel shirt that you're wearing?
No, I'm good with clothes for right now.
But guess what? Every day somebody's selling those products.
Yeah.
So you will, if you start looking at stats, you will see the triangle forming. 90% of the time, people, doesn't mean they're not your clients, just means not right now. So what I'm trying to say is focus on the 7 and the 3, not on the 90. Because the 7 and the 3, because think about it from a business point of view, if the 7 joins the 3, you triple your sales. You triple your sales. And who doesn't want to triple their sales? A lot of time when I make that point, people get an aha moment. They're like, I've been targeting those 90% of the people, because it's like you were talking about the flannel shirt that you're good. You said you don't need any. I can have the most amazing sell, the most amazing advertising, the most amazing copy. You're not going to buy, Matthew, because you're good.
Because I don't need it. Yeah.
Exactly. And with the earphones, it's almost broken. So if I throw in some discount, maybe it's a label that you want. If I offer same-day delivery, well, most likely you will click buy now. That is what I'm saying. So if we focus on the 7 and the 3%, everybody's happier. That is what I was trying to say. That depending on where you want to spend your time, because time is a very, very important commodity.
And I think it's really interesting because that timing aspect is like, when is the right time for someone to engage with, and for me, I think one of the interesting things in this is how we work with a service business versus how we work with a product, with physical product. And one of the things I'm really interested in and kind of have been exploring is there are different aspects of what I do for different times. So for example, like, well, sometimes someone might be looking for a specific answer to something, and there might be some content of mine that someone
Okay.
wants for something. There might be a specific thing. Sometimes people might be exploring, and they might be kind of broadly in the area of what they need, and then there might be a workshop. Or sometimes people might want a really deep dive and might want one-to-one work, and that one-to-one work can actually take different angles too. Is it more technical and practical? Is it more kind of theoretical and around different ideas and what ones might serve you to explore? So it's like there's a whole load of different things, but the same, there's a core of people who have this problem enough that they ever need to do anything about it, but that they have different needs at different times. And I think when we're thinking about service in particular, bearing in mind that we can maintain a relationship through some of this stuff with people, and it's an ongoing thing. And particularly if it is relationship based, then also their success and your success are linked in a way that gives you
So when you say relationship based, what do you mean by that?
So I
want to
mean
make sure I understand you. Like when you say relationship based.
So I mean that we actually, particularly in there's something very transactional about, particularly about product stuff. It's like I have a need, I buy a thing. Whereas there's something kind of, particularly in the coaching work, where yes, there's a need, but it's like it's part of a bigger story. It's part of a bigger context. And so there's an ongoing kind of relationship as things change and develop, that you're kind of working with someone around for a longer period of time. And I think that can make some of this stuff a little bit of a challenge, actually, for me. Like some of the, where I'd taken on the models that work kind of for one-off transactions and only that one-off transaction. And there's a both and. I completely get there's a both and. There's a like, how can you do the one-off thing in that wider relationship context, I think is the question.
Okay, so would you say, if you're going to a doctor like a GP, would you say that's service-based or product-based, his consultation?
Service-based.
Service-based, okay. So when you talk about relationship, are you looking for your GP to be your new BFF?
No, but what
Exactly.
I am looking for is the GP is not to have to explain the entire context for to get my needs met. So, for example, and this is a problem with a direct problem with a lot of medical practitioners and with neurodiversity, is if you present with a certain set of experiences, symptoms, you'll get the diagnosis that is the most probable for the wider population. Very likely. If you are different in some way, that means you're different from that wider population. And that means that there's actually something much more likely that you have that might not get met. So this is what I mean by the relationship.
Like an outlier.
Is you're not an outlier for you, but you're an outlier for the wider population. And so it's the knowing people and building a relationship and them understanding you and you understanding them.
Okay. So I think I know what you mean. It's like if you go there for illness, but because the doctor knows you well enough with a family history and maybe some of the previous thing, he might be able to figure out something versus a GP that you made meeting on the day.
And I think it boils down to this, know what you mean, is that over time, what I'm thinking is actually we accumulate a shared set of meanings and that's valuable. And so there's something in this, that over time we do build more understanding, but that takes time, and that's and I'm thinking in the selling sense is like, we want to understand that that's part of the picture, and that we're not just doing the things one off, that there's a wider relationship, and that's particularly true for service businesses.
Everybody's selling something. I mean, it's either as tangible or intangible. When you get out of school, when you get a job, guess what? You have to sell what you represent to get that interview. getting an increase, you have to sell that concept to your boss why you should deserve a bigger pay. Everybody's selling something. It's not everybody understands it. Some of the people, they see this as sales as a dirty word, but it's just about the mindset. It's just about the mindset. Like, whether doctor's selling something, the doctor is selling that why you should come to me versus going to another GP down the road. Because, yes, carry on.
Yeah, I think it's like this idea of a shared understanding, and that we're selling to meet this mutual thing, and that's the process. Thinking of selling as really knowing what figuring out what someone means,
Exactly.
rather than jumping straight to that conclusion.
Exactly. Instead of assuming, and that's what I'm saying. Like, these skills are transferable if people are willing to learn. And it takes what I've just seen, that it takes practice. It definitely takes practice, because we have to unlearn some of the stuff that we assume. For example, asking questions. For example, listening. For example, probe a little bit more. For example, summarizing. So one of the techniques I share with people is, let's say doing a meeting, to summarize it. So, Matthew, what you said is this. And if I understood you correctly, is this and this and this. And what you're looking for is this and this and this. I state out what you said, I summarize it, and I end it with a conclusion. When you have that, then, and you say, yes, that's correct, Charles, then I know we have a mutual understanding. Because I didn't misunderstood you. You confirmed everything I said. So that means I heard you and I understood you.
And I think that I understand what you mean by story selling now in a much deeper way, because it's that's a coherent story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's like it's a
bingo.
It's a coherent story. But interestingly, it's also so close to coaching as a practice in general. It is like a lot of coaching is actually very similar in terms of methodology, that reflecting back and coming to a coherent story. So,
interesting.
I think there's something really fascinating in that overlap. But no,
I think it boils down to every single person wants to be seen, heard, and understood. Think about what that process did. Made you feel seen, made you feel heard, made you feel understood. Human beings are human beings, because we FM, same like I said, same frequency. What's in it for me? Well, what's in it for me is Matthew understood what I meant. Matthew understood what I'm trying to say, and Matthew understood what I need. We FM.
So if people want to kind of talk to you more about this and get in touch with you, we've got your website in the show notes. But what kind of things are you doing where you can help people with this?
Well, I understand that people have different ways of learning. So if you enjoy reading, you can go onto my website. There are two free books to download. One of them called The Microscripts. One of them called Refuse to be Boring, because boring doesn't sell. So for people that like to read, they can download those free ebooks. For people that prefer audio learning, they can also listen to my podcast called Candid Conversations. And for people that like to see my handsome face and hear my lovely voice, then they can go onto my YouTube channel. All these are accessible on the website flyingkite.co.za. And if they want to connect with me, LinkedIn, YouTube, podcast, it's all there.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, and are there any particular people that you'd like to reach out to you who if people are in the audience and they're thinking, I'm not sure if I'm the right person, just for clarity's sake, who would you love to get in touch?
All right. The type of people that I work with normally have three different, they're basically three things. I work well with people that are smart, hungry, and humble. Smart, hungry, and humble. So if you are smart, if you're hungry, and if you're humble, we can work together. If not, let's rather not go through this, because it's going to be an unpleasant exchange. So what I mean by that is smart in terms of common sense. I can teach a lot of things I cannot teach common sense. I cannot. Hungry, meaning that you have the desire to get better, because as any coach in any field, even as a physical trainer, I can teach you about diet, I can teach you about doing the right exercise, but guess what, Matthew, you're the one that needs to go out and do those reps. So you only do it if you are hungry enough for that. And humble, meaning that you realize that you need help. And that being said, my coaching style, when I tell people, is I know a fair amount about selling, but I know I don't know everything. So if Matthew, if you ask me a question that I don't know, I'll say to you, Matthew, great question. I'm not too sure about the answer, but let's figure it out together. So that's my style.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really, really helpful kind of practical conversation today. So really appreciate that. And I thank you for being on the show.
Matthew, the pleasure is mine. Virtual handshake.
Excellent. Thank you. And I hope it got you in the audience thinking as well and was useful for you. Please do reach out and get in touch with Charles if it did. There's so much there to explore. And it is your support in the audience that makes this possible. So yeah, definitely share it with anyone you think also might benefit. Upcoming and past episodes are available on YouTube and on LinkedIn, and you can search for Delightful Dissent on your favourite podcast platform, though at time of recording you probably won't hear this if you're listening to the podcast because it's a little bit out of date, and I have been working really hard on this but have hit a lot of tricky technical barriers, so we're getting there. Next episode I'm going to be talking to Lucy Vignola, who's a coach, events consultant, and permaculturist. And we're going to be talking about the idea that you should do what you know. So, like sometimes we're doing stuff that doesn't fit into neat little boxes. Sometimes it can't be tried and tested. There isn't a way, that works. And where maybe we're working in a way that just it isn't that predictable. We have to be exploratory. And that's really, really hard in a world that wants stuff in neat little boxes all the time. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that. And that's going to be live at 1 p.m. UK time on Tuesday, the 17th of January. So I very much hope to see you all then. But in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thanks and goodbye.